Good morning. Do we, as scientifically trained people, have to send our intellect to the moon in order to be faith-related people? Or is faith and reason compatible somehow? This morning I would like to talk to you about the first nutritional scientific experiment recorded in ancient literature. It takes us back 2,600 years. But what I would like to do is, I would like you to go beyond the science. I like to challenge you to go beyond the human body. I like to challenge you to go beyond the watch and to find the watchmaker. Because even though we think we know something scientifically speaking, we're just arrogant. We know very, very little. And so I want to pray that God, the maker of all things, may open our eyes and help all of us to begin to see the reality of a force beyond ourselves. Our Father in heaven, we want to surrender this hour and this day and this moment to you, that we may find the true reality of our being and discover the force that makes it possible to change our habits and to become the best people we can become so we can be a blessing to others. Amen. The topic this morning is Daniel's diet, burden or blessing. Of the 66 books that make up this special book, the Bible, one book in particular stands out in that it was not written for the people of that day, but this book of Daniel, an Old Testament book, was written for the time of the end. Now, if you would go to the book of Daniel, written 2,600 years ago, and you go to the 12th chapter, here's what you find in verse 4. But Daniel shut up the words and sealed this book even to the time of the end. Here is Daniel, a man who has just written the scroll, the manuscript. He has written the book. And there's only one more thing to do for an author that is important, and that is you've turned your manuscript in and you're now waiting for the publisher to have the galley proofs in your hands and then to see it in print so that you can send it to your mother-in-law. And Daniel has just written this scroll, this script, under the influence of God's Spirit. The work is done. He must feel relieved. And now he wants to see it in print. And the story goes, a vision appears, an angel comes, and Daniel asks about the book. And the angel says, Daniel, shut up the words. Shut up this book. Close it. It's sealed. It is going to be sealed. Is going to be understood until the end of time. Daniel, the scroll, the book that you have written, this prophetic book, you don't understand it. No one understands it until, what does it say? The time of the end. Someday they will. And then Daniel must have been looking very puzzled, and then the answer comes back, it will be at a time when many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Someday, This book of Daniel, which you have just written, you don't understand it. No one understands it. But someday, at the time of the end, when knowledge shall increase, when travel shall increase, then people will understand it. That's how we know that we are somehow living in the time of the end. It was in the 15th, 16th century when the early Protestant reformers began to understand something about the book of Daniel. I mean, they studied these pages and they began to understand Daniel's panoramic prophecy. He talked about 5 major kingdoms that would come and usher in the time of the end. And you remember, there's the vision, there's a story of a large statue and image. And the king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, that was the reigning monarch then, had this dream, and he comes to Daniel and he said, Daniel, nobody's able to interpret this dream that I have, but can you help? And Daniel said, yes, my God has revealed to me that you, O king, are the head of the picture. You're the head of gold. You're superior to all the other kingdoms that represent the civilizations of this world. And then he says, and then there will come another kingdom that is inferior to you. It's kind of lopsided, 2 powers that make up a kingdom. And later on, Daniel here talks about the fact that there's going to be a kingdom coming after Babylon. He predicts and he gives the name in the 5th and 6th chapter, and he talks about there'll be a kingdom coming called Medo-Persia. It's there in the Bible. This has been said before it was even there. And then Daniel says, and king, then there will be another aspect, another kingdom coming. It will be made out of brass. And then in chapter 8 of Daniel, it's being identified, but the kingdom that shall follow, Media and Persia, will be the kingdom of Greece, and will be a powerful king, and his kingdom will suddenly come to an end and will divide into 4 kingdoms. Predicted prophetically. This was written 2,600 years ago. There was no Media Persia. There was no Greece identified in the biblical record. Amazing. And then there will be another kingdom coming. It's not identified by name. It became Rome, the old Roman Empire. But it's there. And then he talks about the image, the 2 feet, 10 toes, and the civilization will break up into many, many smaller kingdoms. The European civilization over the next 1,500 some years, and they will marry and intermarry, but the 2 substances will not hold together. It will be a brittle empire, a brittle civilization. And then the kingdom of God will come, the time of the end. This is what the Protestant reformers began to understand. They caught a glimpse of it then. And then in the 18th and 19th century, more understanding came about this book of Daniel and the prophecies, what they meant, identified, strengthening the belief that here you have an unusual book that has prophetic capabilities that are genuine, testable. When shall the time come when people understand the book of Daniel? It is no longer a sealed book. It's understandable. It gives us the panorama of kingdoms and powers that will come. The political arena is outlined here, and it takes us into our current time even. Time of the end, characterized by people being able to go in to and fro. Travel shall increase. I mean, they no longer fly. But I could get on a Concorde in New York, and in 4 hours I would be in Paris. It would take weeks on the Queen Mary. Now we can do it in 4 hours. There will be a time when knowledge will increase and people will travel to and fro. Time of the end. And knowledge shall increase. We now understand that every 4 years our knowledge doubles. and our computers have to be replaced, right? And if we don't have broadband and we have to wait for the computer picture to come on, we get very anxious. And yet, 30, 40 years ago, when the first computer was built, the builder said, I can envision that someday there will be a demand for 3 computers in the world. And those computers would be taking up a whole room, a building. That was the idea. Look what happened. You can have the whole Bible, all 66 books, on one little inch-squared chip. Knowledge shall increase. We have information. We're living in the informational age, but the trouble is we don't know what to do with information anymore because we don't know how to sort out what is right and what is wrong, what is genuine, what is not. Daniel, shut up this book, seal it. But people will understand it at the end of time when knowledge shall increase and people shall travel to and fro and people will understand this book and what it means. Regardless of what your thinking is, there's a net effect in the frequency of earthquakes in this world. People say, yes, they've always been there, but we have better communication. That's part of it. But there's a net increase in the number of major earthquakes. And the Bible talks about, in the prophetic chapter of Matthew 24, in the time towards the end, there'll be more earthquakes. And people's hearts will melt for fear. I send our daughter on the freeway to Los Angeles twice a week for her doctoral work there as a psychologist that is in the making. And when I send her off, her mother and I, we say, Lord, protect this child from road rage. We get on airplanes and the thought comes to us, 9/11. And people are more scared today than ever before. We lock our doors with special double bolts. It is no longer the same world. And the Bible talks about, in the end, there will be fear, and people's heart will melt for fear. And people will be driven into a frenzy of relationships that don't mean anything anymore. One-night stands. And we become fragmented as people, broken vessels, chasing after the almighty dollar. And we acquire more and more in conspicuous consumption and become less and less satisfied within. But this morning, I don't want to talk to you about Daniel, the book of Daniel, as a prophetic Magna Carta. But rather, I want to talk to you about something that is in the first book of Daniel. And here's my question. If you can believe in a God that inspired this book, if you can believe in a creator God who made us, if that is comfortable for you, then I want to ask the question, if this book of Daniel was inspired by God and written down by Daniel to help people understand a panoramic historic perspective of the kingdoms and the political things that would happen, if this book was written for the end of time, why then does the book begin with a little human interest story that was very important then and is interesting and important to us today? Why? You know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about a little story about nutrition. And my question is, if this nutritional story, this first scientific experiment, is recorded in a book that was supposed to be important at the end of time, maybe there's a reason why this little story is recorded here, because maybe we can learn something from it, because nutrition has to do with clarity of mind. Oh, we talk about cholesterol, and we talk about keep your arteries open, and we talk about diabetes, we talk about all these kind of things. They're all important. But ultimately, the ultimate purpose of health is to have clear minds to support the citadel of our being, the mind, because that's where it's at. And you want to live a healthy lifestyle because you want to keep this mind alert and balanced, and to help you to make good decisions and to enjoy the beauty of this world by following some ethical principles that give us joy and hope and peace and compassion, and it focuses less on us but more on others and the creatures around us. Isn't that right? So, Daniel, the first chapter, he talks here about Nebuchadnezzar. And by the way, in some of the other books of the Bible, it was prophesied that someday Nebuchadnezzar would come to Jerusalem and besiege the city, conquer the city, and take the kingdom of the Israelites. It was prophesied that this would happen unless the people would change. They didn't change, and so captivity resulted. For 70 years, all prophesied, and so here it is. Nebuchadnezzar comes to Jerusalem, he besieges the city, and he takes the city, and he takes with him the symbols of authority, the sacred vessels of the temple there. And so you go to the first chapter, and it says, and the king carried with him into his own house the sacred vessels from the temple of God. And then the king, Nebuchadnezzar, spoke to the master of his court that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed. These were princes, children in whom was no blemish. These were faultless. This was the cream of the crop of Israel. He should take these children, these young men that were well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace. Old English. You know what it just says? Go and take the finest of the Israelites, young men that are smart, with high IQ, educated, cunning in knowledge and in science, the future inner circle, bring them to Babylon. And so they did. And then it says, and then when they come to Babylon, then enroll them in the Harvard Royal University of Babylon and teach them the language of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. King Nebuchadnezzar was very shrewd. He was wise. He understood something about anthropology. And he said, when you bring these Jewish princes to Babylon, send them to the Royal University, the Harvard of Babylon, and enculturate them with our thinking patterns, with our culture, and with our language. Bring them on board the way we think. And then the king said, there's one more thing I want you to do. Not just Harvard in Babylon, but also I want you to give them the royal food. I mean, King Nebuchadnezzar was the ultimate potentate. He was powerful. He reigned in splendor and in wealth. He had everything that you could imagine, but he was willing to share it with some of these Hebrew princes and with some of the younger people there. And what was it that he shared with them? It says here, verse 5, and the king Nebuchadnezzar appointed them, these young men, a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank. And he decreed that they should be living and eating and drinking this food for 3 years. So that at the end of the 3 years, they would be standing up in the national board examination of the king. That's what the Bible says. 3 years. The king's food. You have to understand, in those days, it was believed that the food made the king. The royal jelly. That's where it comes from. And if you want to think like the king, if you want to build your brain like the king's brain, you have to eat the king's food, because the food makes the brain, the food makes the king. Therefore, the king says, I want you to think like I think. I want to build you up into the elite, in the inner circle, to run my government. And so to do this, you have to think like the king. And here are the royal provisions. 3 years. Now, we don't know what the king's meat, what the king's food was like. But we know it was not a vegetarian diet. I mean, it says it here. The king's table, meat. We also know that it was inebriating, right? It talks about wine, alcohol. We also know that it talks about dainties. So I would imagine they had the Haagen-Dazs and everything else there. They had the Pringles there. It was all there. It just had a different name. It was a rich diet. It was a diet of variety. I mean, you just think about that for a minute. You have been married for 25 years. And all of a sudden, it hits you as a man. What a louse have I been. She has raised the kids. I'm just bringing the bacon, or whatever it is, home. She has put up with these kids all these years. I mean, I used to give her flowers during courtship days. I haven't done it in 25 years. I mean, she's washing the car. I mean, she's doing everything. And all of a sudden it hits you and you say, I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to allow her this time to remind me that an anniversary is coming up. This time I shall remember 25 years. And so he drops a hint about 2 weeks before the anniversary comes up, which usually she has to do, the hinting. But this time he doesn't. He says, you know, honey, I'd like to do something in a couple of weeks on Sunday. Why don't we drive out to San Francisco? There's a very, very nice restaurant. And, you know, let's go there and do something. And, you know, if you want to dress up, that's okay. But just nice. So she is on alert. And she wants to ask, you know, why? What is the occasion? But she's too wise. So he calls the special restaurant on the 19th floor, and he calls up, he makes arrangements with the maitre d', and he says, I want this special table in the corner that overlooks the city, the rotating restaurant. I want to have a long-stemmed red rose on that table. And is there valet service when I drive up? Oh, yes, sir. Everything is taken care of. We will look for you. Sunday comes. She is speechless because on Friday afternoon, he came home early and he washed the car. He polished the car. She hasn't seen this in 25 years, and she wants to say, honey, have you done something wrong and you're atoning for something? Oh, no, she's too wise. She wouldn't do this. And so Sunday morning comes, and he's up early, and 3:15 comes around, and they have booked for the evening. And he's all dressed up, and she's dressed up, and the perfume is there, and the cologne is there. Ooh, hasn't happened in 25 years. This is nice. This is like it used to be before we got deadlocked. And then he says, honey, are you ready? Yes, I'm ready. And so he walks her down to the car, and he goes to the wrong side of the car. He goes to her side, and he opens the door, and she's shocked. And he ushers her in. And then he goes, and they drive off. They drive to the restaurant. There's a valet service. He takes her on the arm. They go up to the 19th floor. There's a maitre d', and he ushers them to the special table. A long-stemmed red rose. 25 years. Maybe it's worth it after all. They begin to settle down, and there are these Ottomans, and she doesn't know what this is all about. And then they help them understand what the Ottoman is for. You relax, and then the maitre d' brings 2 menu cards. They're different. One for him, one for her. Only his has the prices on it. They look over these names. They're all French and international terminology, and they don't really know what to order, but they look around and their salivary glands begin to go into overdrive. And they finally select something, and they know it's going to be good, an hors d'oeuvre, and then they have the main meal, and they just look at each other with great love. And she says to herself, why doesn't he do this every day? Men, it doesn't take lots to give a woman that feeling that she's cherished. Men, you used to give those dandelions to her because that's all you could afford in courtship days. Why don't you do this again? I mean, I don't understand it, but my wife just, that heart goes pitter-patter, pitter-patter. And so I give her some flowers just about every Friday. Well, after a while, it was getting too expensive, so I have begun now to grow my own roses. You see. Let us do these nice things. Health is more than just eating right. Health is being a nice, kind, considerate, loving person. Don't you think so? And so they have this big course. And they have not had this taste experience before. And then they kind of look at each other and they figure the cart with the 5 levels must be coming any moment now, with the desserts, the baklava, and the Black Forest cakes, and the German chocolate cakes. And the maitre d' comes and he says, now, and for the second course, what would you like to have? And they look at each other. They're just about full. But then the maitre said, it's all in the price. It's a 5-course meal. And all of a sudden, he feels kind of weak, and he remembers, do I have the card? I mean, can I afford this? Sir, it's all in the price. It's part of it. We just want you to enjoy it. And so they eat the second course, and the third course, and the fourth course. It's all paid for. Just one more course. I mean, we do this every 25 years only. And a 5th course. And then comes the cart with the seductive foods. There's no more room. But then he assures us, says, honey, just one time more. He says, honey, they assured me these are all calorie-free. And then comes, of course, the bill. And he takes the card and takes care of it. And she's in 7th heaven. And he feels he has done the right thing after 25 years. Now think of it. A gorgeous menu, rich, variety, it's all there. Once every 25 years. And here you have now Nebuchadnezzar, and he says to these 4 Hebrew young men, he said, I want you to have the royal food every morning, every noon, and every night, and it's free, and you have to eat it. And it's a royal food, and it makes you wise, and it makes you think like the king. It's for you, and after 3 years, you will be tested what the food has done for you. That is the situation. And Daniel says, what does it say? You know the story. What does it say? Here it is in verse 8. But Daniel made up his mind. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat. I will not eat these cadavers. I could have used the word corpses, but I didn't want to hurt your feelings. And so Daniel purposed in his heart, and he said, no, I will not defile myself. I come from a different tradition, from the Hebrew tradition. I come from very simple food. I mean, we have lentils and tabbouleh and very simple food. That's what we have grown up with, and I cannot see it. I cannot understand it. It doesn't fit into my value system. I have to be honest to myself. It's a matter of integrity. No! And so he said, I will not eat the king's meat, nor do I drink the wine, nor will I have his dainties. And therefore he requested of the prince of the overseers that he might not defile himself. I mean, think of the courage. A prisoner, 4 prisoners at the royal court, groomed for greatness, to become the chancellor of the king. But you only do it if you eat the food, because that makes you think like the king. And these 4 Hebrews, they live up to their value system. They practice integrity, and they said, no. Verse 9. Now God had brought Daniel and his friends into favor and tender love with the overseer. Now this might be a little strange for you if you are not comfortable with the Christian concept that there's a loving God. But for some of us that feel comfortable with it, you see that God's Spirit has already worked on the heart of the overseer and brought these young Hebrews into favor with him. Now this is very important to me. Before you can even ask, God has already the plan in place, and all we have to do is fit into it and enjoy it. That's a Christian concept, isn't it? But there's something else in this verse here. I don't think that Daniel was one of those dogmatic health reformers that would say, I shall not eat this, and give a lecture on the dangers of meat and wine and everything else. Oh no, I think Daniel was a very kind, gentle man with his friends. And by their character, by their loving kindness, by their personalities that already endeared themselves to the overseer. And now, when the test came, it wasn't all that difficult to say to the overseer, sir, you have been very good to us. However, we have a little question. I wonder if you could help us. Listen, folks, health reformers are always the kindest and the most patient and the most gentle people that you will find. Did you hear me? You look for that educational moment when you can drop a pearl on someone you love to help them to see. People don't want to change. And most people you cannot win over by intellectual argument, because you might win the argument perhaps, but you will have lost your friend. You want to win your friend over, and you do it by quietly practicing lovingly what is important to you. And you look for opportunities where you can drop a pearl. Are you with me? And when they embrace the pearl and the health begins to improve and the blood pressure pills are gone and the cholesterol drops by 25% and the angina disappears and the insulin has to be dropped, they say, yes, I'm so grateful that you let me know at the right moment and I was able to receive that gift. Let us look for moments where people are receptive. And so I think Daniel was one of these kind of people. He was loving, he was gentle. He was not a dogmatist that would engage in argument for argument's sake and making everybody else feel stupid. No. And so the overseer said to Daniel, I fear the Lord, the king, who has appointed your meat and your drink and your dainties. You know, the top man says, look, Daniel, I understand. You don't want to eat this food, and you want me to give you permission. But look, I worked too hard to climb the political ladder, to endanger my head, because the king told me this is the food that I want you to serve for 3 years. I can't do it. I mean, I like you 4 young Hebrew men, but, look, my job is more important to me. I don't want to lose my head. And you know what Daniel says now? It's right here. You know what he says? He agrees. Yes, I can understand. That's a very difficult decision. Folks, when you have differences, agree as much as you can and then begin to turn people around lovingly. And so Daniel says, yes, I can understand. You've worked hard for this position here. And you don't want to do this, do you? And the overseer says, no, because if I feed you not the king's food, you're going to look much skinnier and you won't have the intellect. Because after all, the food makes the king, the food makes you. No, I can't do this. And then when the test comes, my head is gone. And Daniel says, yes, I understand. Then he says, would you be open to a 10-day trial? I mean, it says here, then said Daniel, prove your servants, I beseech you, for 10 days, and let us have pulse to eat and water to drink. What Daniel's saying is, look, the king is not going to come around in the next few days to check things out. It's going to be 3 years from now. Why don't you just do a little trial with us? Just 10 days. And all we want is water and pulse. That's legumes, vegetables. And then after 10 days, if we don't look very well and if we look emaciated and if we cannot think straight anymore, we can then discuss it again. Daniel was a young man of faith and he knew that God would stand by his side. He understood something about these principles, that what we have today in our food supply comes from a higher source. And so the overseer thinks for a while and, you want water to drink and vegetables for 10 days? Yes, just the 4 of us. Just for 10 days? 10 days. And then you can compare us with the other thousands of young people that are eating the king's food, that are also in government service. And then you can see if there's a difference. Granted, from a scientific experimental design point of view, the experimental group is rather small. 4 people is rather small. But the experiment began. But do you understand that Daniel is not asking for a lacto-ovo-vegetarian diet? He's asking for a complete vegetarian diet. Some people call that a vegan diet, whatever the word is. But he said, I don't want any animal products. I just want to have a plant-based diet, vegetables, and water. And you perhaps, as a Christian person, begin to reason now, and you say, why does he make such a big fuss about this? God used Martin Luther powerfully. And Martin Luther didn't have to give up his German beer. And he used the Wesley brothers and didn't have to give up their steaks. Why is there now this imposition, this extra burden on trying to promote a vegetarian lifestyle? But is it not true that, according to the biblical record, the dilemma on this earth started in a garden over a forbidden fruit? The issue was appetite. Is that not the story? And when Jesus, who is believed to be the incarnation of God, came down to bring us together again as creatures with the God who is, when he came down, wasn't his first temptation also over appetite, where the arch enemy took him into the desert and said, you are hungry, you have not eaten for 40 days. Take these stones and turn them into bread, and I shall then worship you. Wasn't it appetite? And do you think it's possible that maybe in the end of time it is appetite again? because it has to deal with clear minds. Daniel didn't want the meat. He didn't understand cholesterol and saturated fats and these kind of things, but he understood something that he wanted to have a clear mind. He wanted to think clearly. Remember? Because later on came the test of Nebuchadnezzar, and it was an ultimate test of loyalty. And they all had to bow down in front of this huge image that the king built to show that the people had loyalty, subjects were loyal to him. And then there was Daniel and his three friends, and they said in their hearts, King Nebuchadnezzar. It's all in the Bible. You can play the music over and over and over again. And when it stops, we shall not bow our knees, because our God will take care of us. Now, they could have reasoned things out differently. They could have said, look, we're the only four representatives of the God of gods in this heathen land here. This is not a good time to become a martyr. We just go through the motions and we kind of kneel down, but in our hearts, we are worshiping the King of Kings. No! It was a matter of integrity. It was standing up and believing that which was important to them, and to believe that someone would take care of them whom they had trusted. That was the issue. And so they were faithful. And they lived up to their principles that they knew were right for them. But 10 days, I mean, to have an effect on your body, it takes at least a year of healthful living, or at least 3 months. But 10 days, this was just a generic figure of speech. I thought about this for many, many years until I worked at the Pritikin Longevity Center, and I saw some 10,000 people that would come for 30 days at a time, and they had all these illnesses like diabetes and hypertension and angina and so on, and within 10 days the angina began to move away, and the insulin had to be reduced within 3, 4, 5 days, all in response to a very, very simple diet. As you know, the Pritikin diet is a very, very low-fat diet, which is pretty close to foods as grown, wholesome foods. Let me show you a little video that they're rolling in right now. I want you to see what happens. Take a look at this video here. It's going to blow your socks off.
We don't have a health crisis in this country. We have a lifestyle crisis in this country for health.
Many patients that you can identify, it's their lifestyle. It's at the root of their problems.
Remember, the first sign, I need the video, of many heart attacks, 40%. The first sign is sudden death. There's not much you can do after that.
I first woke up, so to speak, when I was working on the anesthesia service, learning how to put people to sleep. And I was seeing my patients for the next day's surgery for coronary artery bypass surgery in order to bypass clogged arteries in their heart. Because it was late at night, I drew the man's blood test, and when I took the blood to the laboratory and had it processed, I couldn't believe my eyes. Now, normally, this liquid layer floating on top of the blood clot is quite transparent. It's a yellow, but quite clear. You can see right through it. The blood in this patient's tube, however, was anything but clear. The serum floating on his clot was thick and greasy white. It looked like glue. In fact, it stuck to the sides of the blood tube when I shook the tube. I went back to the patient. I said, Mr. Phillips, did you eat before you came to the hospital tonight? He said, yes. I said, what did you have? He said, I had a cheeseburger and a milkshake. And when he said that, I realized that what I was looking at in his tube was all the fat in the beef burger, all the butter fat in the cheese, and the butter fat in the ice cream and in the milkshake. And all this fat had oozed out into his blood and actually turned his blood fatty. Well, 30, 40, 50 years of keeping your blood very fatty creates changes in the blood vessels that are very dangerous.
Over the years, arteries can become clogged with fatty material. Then a blood clot can form, blocking the blood flow completely. If the artery leads to the heart, the lack of oxygen can cause heart muscle to die. That's a heart attack. If the clogged artery leads to the brain, the patient has a stroke.
The next morning, we took Mr. Phillips to the operating room, and I put him to sleep, and the surgeon opened up his chest. And from these arteries, he began pulling out yellow, greasy deposits of fatty material called atherosclerosis.
Can just 30 days?
1, 2, 3, yeah. Do you want to see this again? You see, we're talking here about clarity of mind. We're talking here about arteries are becoming clogged up with atherosclerosis, where you always find the cholesterol and the saturated fat. Any pathologist will tell you when they open up these corner arteries that are narrowed with these plaques, the atherosclerosis, they always find animal fats, they find saturated fats, they find cholesterol that you only find in animals. They will never find their broccoli or tofu. But here's the application. We cannot change these arteries in 10 days, but we can change the viscosity of the blood. Within a week's time, as you lean out your diet, you lean out your blood. And the blood becomes now thinner, and it can get through these narrowed vessels much easier and bring oxygenated blood to the heart muscle, and you no longer have the angina pectoris, oftentimes in 10 days, 15 days. 2/3 of all the patients within 4 weeks have no longer angina pain, and they're off medication because the blood thins down. Because before it was like molasses, now it is like water. I had a 10-year-old in my CHIP class one night. And I said to him, I haven't seen you here before. And he said, yes, sir, I have not been here because I'm attending the CHIP for Kids program. Oh. And I said, what did you learn there? He said, I learned all about atherosclerosis, 10 years of age. And I said, what does that mean? Well, it means that you get clogged on the inside and the blood cannot flow anymore. I said, really? I said, did they do some experiments? Yes, sir, he said. They use different straws with different diameters. If you have a large straw versus a narrow straw, you can suck up much more water, much more fluid. You want to have large arteries? I said, yes. And then he said, we did another experiment. It was the same size straw, but this time one liquid was thick and heavy, like a heavy milkshake, and another one was like water. And sir, it was much easier to drink the water through the straw, and that's how the body and the arteries work. I said, wow, 10 years of age, 10 days, amazing, simple foods, water to drink. And Daniel, here, the story tells us. And so the overseer consented to these 4 Hebrews in this matter and proved them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their countenances, their faces appeared fairer and better looking than the others, than all the other children which ate the king's meat and drank the king's wine. And so the overseer took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink and gave them water and vegetables for the next 3 years. The important lesson this morning should not be overlooked. We believe that there's a power in this world that can communicate with us. We access this power by prayer, through meditation. That power, we believe, reaches us, anatomically speaking, not by reaching us in our big toes. Where does God commune with us? Through our pelvic girdle? Where does God reach us? He speaks to our heart? This is just an allegorical term for the brain. God reaches us through those billions of computers that are hooked together to provide the greatest marvel in the world ever designed. that allows you to recall in split seconds things that happened 19 years ago on a hot day. You remember that first kiss? Amazing. It has a plasticity. It can change. You can put down new nervous strands, new neurological systems in your brain, and you say, but I'm 77 years of age, and you can change. You can lay down new neurological grooves up there by doing it. But look how we have been tempted. It is much different today than in the garden as it was. It was just an apple or maybe a mango. It was that forbidden fruit. Today, you go into a supermarket and you have 30,000 food items screaming at you, take me, take you, and if you do, you'll be happy and satisfied. And you take your cart and you go through all these aisles and the food just tumble automatically into that cart. And then when you come to the checkout, it's like this. You say, my goodness, and what is in that cart is going to be walking around tomorrow because we're eating this kind of food. Seduced. 30,000 food items, appetite, integrity, making a decision in favor of the best foods available today. Scientifically documented. Simple food. Foods as grown, not processed, engineered taste sensations that have to have a label on it because it warns you what is in it. God's food doesn't need a nutrition label. And then the tests would come to Daniel. They're recorded in the book of Daniel again and again. He became the chancellor, the prime minister of 4 kings. And he was discharged as a man of great honor and a man of integrity. Trustworthy. He lived a very simple life. He lived on a very simple diet. He followed the dictates of his conscience that would allow him to focus on food where he could be kind to other creatures, where he could leave a softer footprint on the earth, where he could save 30 to 40% on his food bill by eating a simpler food and enjoying the health in every aspect, including spiritual health, a clear mind, because you see, the arteries to the brain also get narrowed. And if God talks to us through our brains, you want to have wide open arteries. You don't want to have atherosclerosis or the vessels that are supposed to bring nutrients and oxygen to help your computer to work at maximum level. To begin to understand now a little bit about why perhaps that little story about the nutritional experiment is in the first chapter of a book that was written for the end of time. Maybe we can learn something from this by applying this principle. We can have clearer minds than ever before, so that we can begin to see through the seductions of our age, the manipulation, the commercialization of our lifestyle, and we can begin to see a God who is there and who wants to reach us by having clear minds. And at the end, you know what the book says? Daniel, let me give you the last verse here. And when the 3 years were up, the national board exam took place. And the 4 Hebrew men were brought to King Nebuchadnezzar. And then it says, and as they stood before the king, in all matters of wisdom and understanding, that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the others. God is a God that wants us to have clear minds and clear channels of communication and clean arteries so that we can be in good health, so we can serve not only others, but we can also fulfill the purpose for which we were created.